When most people think of DIing towns, they think of boarded-up factories and empty main streets. But across the South, the Catskills, and the Steel Valleys of Pennsylvania, something else is vanishing. Entire Jewish communities that built temples, ran stores, and buried their dead in Hebrew cemeteries are disappearing, not because of persecution, because the children left. The synagogues still stand. In many of these towns, you can buy a 3-bedroom house for less than a used car in London. These are 12 dying Jewish towns where you can still buy a home for almost nothing. Now let us begin. Number 12, Dothan, Alabama, a city of roughly 72,000 people in the southeastern corner of the state. It calls itself the peanut capital of the world. But in 2007, Dothan made international headlines for something else entirely. A local businessman named Larry Blumberg and his family foundation launched a program offering Jewish families up to $50,000 each to relocate to Dothan. The package included synagogue membership, Jewish education for the children, and a community welcome committee. The story was covered by the New York Times, the BBC, and The Guardian. But the reason behind the offer was not a curiosity, it was a crisis. Temple Emmanuel, established in 1929, was running out of people. In the mid-20th century, Dothan had roughly 150 Jewish families. They ran clothing shops and furniture stores along Foster Street. By 2007, fewer than 50 families remained. Some Friday nights, the congregation could barely gather 10 adults for a minyan. Larry Blumberg saw his community disappearing and decided to do something about it. Several families did move to Dothan. Some stayed, some left again. The program slowed. The temple still opens its doors, but the cemetery now holds more names than the membership rolls. Homes in Dothan's older residential streets can be found from $40,000. Some foreclosures sit below $25,000. A town that offered $50,000 to bring Jewish families in is a remarkable story. But travel to the Mississippi River and you will find a place where the Jewish community did not need to be recruited. It built itself into the very architecture of the town, and then it simply disappeared. Number 11, Vicksburg, Mississippi, a city of roughly 21,000 people perched on the bluffs above the Mississippi River. Most people know Vicksburg for the Civil War, the 47-day siege of 1863 that split the Confederacy in two. But before the siege, during the siege, and long after it, Jewish families were at the center of life in this town. Congregation Anshe Chesed was established in 1841. Jewish merchants had arrived with the cotton trade, setting up dry goods stores and trading houses along Washington Street. By the early 1900s, Vicksburg had roughly 1,200 Jewish residents. They helped fund the public library. A Jewish man served as mayor. The synagogue they built in 1871 is a Moorish revival building with arched windows and ornamental brickwork. It is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Today, fewer than 20 Jewish individuals remain in Vicksburg. The congregation can no longer form a minyan on its own. The building is now maintained more as a monument than as a place of active worship. Walk down Washington Street and you will pass old storefronts that once carried Jewish family names above their doors. The names are gone. The buildings remain. Homes in Vicksburg's historic residential districts can be found from $30,000. Some properties sit below $15,000. A congregation that once helped rebuild a city after a Civil War siege and now cannot gather 10 people for prayer is a particular kind of silence. But head further south along the Mississippi and you will find a town where the Jewish story is even older, even grander, and even more completely gone. Number 10, Natchez, Mississippi, population roughly 14,000. Before the Civil War, Natchez had more millionaires per capita than any town in the United States. Many of them were Jewish cotton merchants and bankers who had arrived from Germany and Alsace in the 1830s and 40s. B'nai Israel congregation was founded in 1843. It is the oldest Jewish congregation in the state. The temple building, completed in 1905, still stands on a quiet residential street lined with oak trees. At its peak, the Jewish community numbered roughly 500 people. They owned the general stores and ran the cotton brokerage offices along Main Street. The Jewish cemetery sits on a bluff overlooking the Mississippi River. Some of the headstones carry dates from the 1840s, Hebrew script carved into stone that has weathered nearly 2 centuries of southern heat. Today, fewer than 30 Jewish individuals remain. The cemetery holds more names than the living congregation. The temple opens for occasional services and heritage tours. Homes requiring renovation start at $25,000. Some outlying properties sit below $20,000. A town where Jewish graves from the 1840s overlook the Mississippi and the living congregation can be counted on two hands is haunting. But cross the river into Louisiana and you will find a place where the Jewish community did not merely shrink, it vanished entirely. Number 9. Donaldsonville, Louisiana, a small town of roughly 7,000 people on the banks of Bayou Lafourche, about an hour west of New Orleans. It was briefly the state capital of Louisiana in 1830. Jewish merchants arrived with the steamboat trade during the sugar boom and within a generation had built Bikur Cholim, a synagogue completed in 1872. It is one of the oldest synagogue buildings in the state. At its height, the Jewish community numbered roughly 200 people. They served on the town council and buried their dead in a Jewish section of the local cemetery. Then the sugar economy shifted. The young people left for New Orleans and Baton Rouge. By the late 20th century, there were no Jewish families left in Donaldsonville at all. The synagogue building is now maintained as a museum by a local preservation group. Non-Jewish neighbors care for the building because they believe it matters. Homes in Donaldsonville can be found from $15,000. Some lots with structures sit below $10,000. A synagogue maintained by people of a different faith because no one of the original faith remains is a story that deserves to be heard. But travel north to the Catskill Mountains of New York and you will find a very different kind of Jewish disappearance. Not a southern congregation fading quietly, an entire holiday empire collapsing into the forest. Number 8. Fleischmanns, New York, a tiny village in Delaware County in the heart of the Catskill Mountains. Population roughly 340. During the mid-20th century, this village and the broader Catskill region formed the beating heart of what became known as the Borscht Belt, a chain of Jewish resort hotels, bungalow colonies, and summer camps that served an estimated 1 million visitors each summer during its peak in the 1950s and 60s. For British viewers, think of it as the Jewish equivalent of the Butlins holiday camps, spread across an entire mountain range. Enormous dining rooms, swimming pools surrounded by families from Brooklyn and the Bronx. Comedians like Joan Rivers and Jerry Seinfeld performing in hotel lounges to audiences of hundreds. Then air conditioning arrived in New York City apartments. Then cheap flights to Florida became available. The resorts began closing one by one. Grossinger's closed. The Concord closed. Kutsher's closed. The bungalow colonies emptied. Today, you can drive through Fleischmanns and see the foundations of former resort buildings visible through the tree line like ruins from another civilization. Homes and former resort properties can be found from $30,000. Some derelict bungalow structures sit below $20,000. An entire mountain resort culture built by and for Jewish families now returning to Forest is one of the great untold stories of American decline. But leave the Catskills and head west to Pennsylvania and you will find a steel town where the Jewish community did not fade on holiday. It was destroyed by an industry. Number 7. Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Population roughly 18,000, down from 67,000 in 1920. A steel town in Cambria County that suffered 3 catastrophic floods. The Great Flood of 1889 killed 2,209 people and remains one of the worst disasters in American history. Each time the city rebuilt, the Jewish community rebuilt with it. Beth Zion Congregation was established in 1862. Jewish merchants had arrived with the steel workers, opening clothing stores and supply shops along Main Street. At its peak, the community numbered roughly 1,500 people. Then in the 1980s, Bethlehem Steel closed its Johnstown operations. The economic base of the city collapsed in a matter of years. For British viewers, it was like the Welsh Valleys after the mines closed, except with a synagogue instead of a chapel. The young people left for Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. The Jewish community shrank from 1,500 to fewer than 50. Homes in Johnstown can be found from $15,000. Some habitable properties sit below $10,000. A community that rebuilt after 3 floods and then lost everything to a steel mill closing is a particular cruelty. But head further west to the shore of Lake Michigan and you will find a city where the Jewish decline happened on an almost unimaginable scale. Number 6. Gary, Indiana. Population, roughly 69,000, down from 178,000 in 1960. Built from nothing in 1906 by the United States Steel Corporation as a company town. Jewish merchants followed the workers. They opened department stores, shoe shops, and furniture showrooms along Broadway. Temple Israel was established in 1909. At least 3 other synagogues were active by the 1940s. The Jewish community numbered an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 people. Then the steel industry collapsed. The population fell by more than 100,000 in 50 years. Entire residential blocks were abandoned. Gary became a national symbol of urban decay. Rows of houses with caved-in roofs, streets wide enough for a metropolis, empty enough for a village. The Jewish community had already left by the 1970s, relocating to suburban Merrillville and Munster. Today, there is no organized Jewish community in Gary. Homes can be found for $5,000 to $15,000. Tax sale properties occasionally appear for less than $1,000. A city where you can buy a house for less than a month's rent in London and where the Jewish community vanished entirely half a century ago is staggering. But travel south to central Mississippi and you will find a town where the last Jewish families held on longer than almost anyone thought possible. Number 5. Meridian, Mississippi. Population roughly 33,000. Temple. Beth Israel was established in 1868. The current building, completed in 1906, is the oldest synagogue building still standing in the state of Mississippi. The Jewish community at its peak numbered roughly 600 people. They were merchants, professionals, and civic leaders. In 1968, the Ku Klux Klan firebombed Temple Beth Israel and the home of the rabbi. The attacks came because the rabbi and several congregants had spoken publicly in support of civil rights. The community rebuilt the temple. They did not leave. But what the Klan could not achieve with dynamite, simple economics accomplished over the following decades. The young people moved to Jackson, to Atlanta, to Memphis. The community shrank from 600 to fewer than 20. The temple now relies on visiting rabbis sent by the Institute of Southern Jewish Life, an organization that sends circuit-riding rabbis to congregations too small to afford their own. Homes in Meridian can be found from $20,000. Some properties sit below $15,000. A temple that survived the Ku Klux Klan and now struggles to gather enough people for a Friday evening service is one of the most quietly devastating stories in the American South. But cross into Arkansas and you will find a city where the decline is not quiet at all. Number 4. Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Population roughly 41,000, down from 57,000 in 1980. One of the fastest shrinking cities in America, ranked by the FBI as one of the most dangerous cities per capita in the United States in multiple recent years. Congregation Anshe Emeth was established in 1867. Jewish merchants ran the department stores on Main Street. They sold clothing, furniture, and hardware. At its peak, the community had roughly 300 families. Then Walmart came and the department stores closed. The cotton economy mechanized and the labor force shrank. The young people left for Little Rock and Dallas. Today, an estimated 20 to 30 Jewish individuals remain. The temple still opens its doors, maintained by a tiny remnant. Homes in Pine Bluff can be found from $10,000. Entire streets of habitable 3-bedroom houses sit below $20,000. A city where you can buy a house for less than a second-hand car, and the temple congregation has shrunk from 300 families to fewer than 30 is harrowing. But our next destination holds something even more painful, a town where the Jewish community was asked to choose between its conscience and its safety, and it chose conscience. Number 3. Selma, Alabama. Population roughly 17,000, down from 28,000 in 1970. On March 7, 1965, 600 civil rights marchers walked east across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. State troopers attacked them with clubs and tear gas. The footage was broadcast on national television that evening. It became known as Bloody Sunday. It changed the course of American history. What most people do not know is that several members of Selma's Jewish community were active supporters of the civil rights movement. Temple Mishkan, Israel, established in 1899, sat in a town where roughly 150 Jewish families had built comfortable lives. When some of them chose to support the movement, they faced social ostracism, threats, and the risk of losing their livelihoods. The Rothschild family became known for their public stance. They paid a price, but they did not stop. After the civil rights victories of the 1960s, Selma did not prosper. Businesses left, population dropped, poverty deepened. Today, fewer than 10 Jewish individuals remain. The temple still stands on a quiet street, handsome and dignified, but there is no permanent congregation. Homes in Selma can be found from $8,000. Some properties sit below $5,000. A Jewish community that stood for civil rights on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and then watched its own town empty around it carries a weight that statistics cannot express. But our penultimate destination holds a different kind of story, one where the disappearance happened not in the South or the Rust Belt, but in the very heartland of American Jewish life. Number 2, Brownsville, Brooklyn, New York, population roughly 113,000. In the early 20th century, Brownsville was the densest Jewish neighborhood in America. Immigrants from Russia, Poland, Lithuania, and Romania packed into tenement buildings along Pitkin Avenue and Stone Avenue. By the 1940s, an estimated 95% of the residents were Jewish. Dozens of synagogues lined the streets. The writer Alfred Kazin, who grew up in Brownsville in the 1920s, described it as the margin of the city beyond which stretched only the new cemeteries of Queens. Then, after the Second World War, Jewish families began leaving. Levittown on Long Island offered new suburban houses with lawns and garages. The GI Bill made mortgages affordable. Within a single generation, Brownsville went from 95% Jewish to almost zero. The synagogue buildings were converted to churches and community centers or simply boarded up. If you walk down Pitkin Avenue today, you can still see Hebrew lettering carved into the stone facades of buildings that are now barber shops and discount clothing stores. The neighborhood is now predominantly African American and Caribbean American, with a median household income of roughly $28,000. Properties occasionally list at prices that would be unthinkable anywhere else in New York City. A neighborhood that was once 95% Jewish and now holds almost no trace of that community beyond faded Hebrew letters on old stone facades is perhaps the most startling transformation on this entire list. But our final destination is different from all the others. It is not a neighborhood. It is a small southern town where what remains is not a community at all. It is a single building on a quiet street. Number 1. Port Gibson, Mississippi, population roughly 1,400, a tiny town on the Natchez Trace, an ancient trail that runs through the Mississippi lowlands. During the Civil War, General Ulysses S. Grant marched his troops through Port Gibson and reportedly said the town was too beautiful to burn. In the second half of the 19th century, Jewish merchants built Gemeluth Chest, a synagogue completed in 1892 in the Moorish Revival style. Arched windows with colored glass, hand-carved wooden pews, brass chandeliers that still hang from the ceiling. The building is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and is considered one of the finest small-town synagogues in the entire United States. At its peak, the Jewish community numbered roughly 100 to 150 people. They ran stores on Main Street and buried their dead in a small cemetery at the edge of town where the headstones carry names in Hebrew and English. Today, there is not a single Jewish resident in Port Gibson, not one. The community did not end with a dramatic event. There was no fire, no flood, no act of violence. The children went to university and did not return. The parents grew old. The last families moved to Jackson or Memphis to be closer to medical care and to other Jewish communities large enough to sustain a synagogue. And when the last one left, the building remained. Gemeluth Chesed is now maintained entirely by a local non-Jewish preservation foundation. Volunteers dust the pews, they polish the chandeliers, they unlock the front door once a year for a heritage tour attended by visitors who drive in from hours away. People who have no connection to the Jewish faith walk through the arched doorway and stand in the silence and look at the colored light falling through the windows onto the empty wooden pews. On the streets around the synagogue, the houses sit quietly behind their porches. Some of them still have the original woodwork. Some of them need new roofs. Their asking prices are written in numbers so low they barely seem real. A 3-bedroom house with a front porch and a view of the oak trees. $15,000, $10,000 less.